So what if I told you that those obsessive, rigid little habits you do every single morning?
The ones that make you think you're, losing your mind a little bit.
Exactly. What if I told you those are actually the exact mechanisms keeping you sane?
Yeah, it's a wild
It
thought.
is. Because, I mean, think about that highly repetitive, mundane task you do every day. Maybe you have this hyper-specific sequence for folding your laundry,
Right.
and you feel this bizarre sense of panic if the seams don't line up perfectly. Or, maybe it's the precise way you measure your coffee.
Tapping the scoop against the canister exactly 3 times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or walking the same route and stepping over that one specific crack in the pavement without even looking down.
We all have them.
We really do. And when you picture that task, I want you to ask yourself a question. Is that action a mindless chore?
Or a compulsion.
Right. A compulsion you feel chained to. Or, and this is the crazy part, could actually be a profoundly calming ritual that is like single-handedly holding the architecture of your entire day together.
Well, the line separating a habit that traps you from a habit that anchors you is, it's incredibly porous.
Porous. I like that.
Yeah, because what we find when we examine the underlying neurobiology of these behaviors is that the physical action itself almost never changes.
Really? Never.
Almost never. I mean, the motor pattern, the sequencing, the neurological loop, those remain identical. What shifts entirely is the contextual framework your brain is using to process that action in real time.
Wow. Okay, so that very subtle but incredibly powerful distinction is basically our mission for today.
It's a great mission.
Yeah, we are doing a deep dive into a remarkable, deeply personal journal entry, or I guess you could call it a short essay. It's titled The Melody of Ice Cubes.
Such a beautiful title.
It really is. And the author of this text, who notably uses the plural we throughout their writing to describe their internal experience, they captured this single, profound morning of realization.
Which is so rare to get on paper like this. Totally. So we're going to use their experience as a lens to explore how our minds process routine. We're going to examine why we so often mistake our own brilliant survival mechanisms for evidence that we are somehow, broken.
Right, the whole what's wrong with me narrative.
Exactly. And we'll look at the physiological reality of how shifting our context can turn what feels like a terrifying void into a truly beautiful melody.
It really is an exceptional piece of writing because it utilizes the absolute smallest micro moments of a morning routine to explain massive macro-level psychological shifts.
Yeah, the contrast is amazing.
It is. We are looking at the exact biological and cognitive transitions that occur when a human being crosses the threshold from merely surviving.
We're actually living.
Yes. This text provides a functional blueprint for understanding the behaviors we tend to judge the most harshly within ourselves.
Okay, so before we get to the morning routine with the ice cubes, which is obviously the title of the piece, we have to start where the text starts.
We have to go to the night before. Right. Because what happens in the dark fundamentally sets the foundation of safety for everything that follows in the light.
It's the prerequisite.
Yeah. So the author begins by telling us that they slept outside on the balcony. But they make a very careful, specific distinction. They write, not outside just the outer part of the nest where the city sounds come through.
The outer part of the nest.
Yeah. And they specifically mention hearing the background hum of birds and traffic. So what's going on there?
Well, that phrase, the outer part of the nest, it implies a deliberate engagement with a liminal space.
The liminal space, so like an in-between space.
Exactly. They are not exposing themselves entirely to the elements, which would trigger, a huge vulnerability response.
Like sleeping on the sidewalk would be terrifying.
Exactly. But they're also not sealing themselves inside the bedroom, which has likely become associated with psychological confinement.
Oh, that makes sense. The bedroom became a trap.
Yeah. By positioning themselves in this threshold environment, they're allowing their nervous system to process the ambient sounds of the city, the traffic, the birds, as proof of life continuing normally.
It's like background noise that says, hey, the world isn't ending.
Precisely. It provides a steady stream of non-threatening sensory data that tells the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, that the surrounding environment is stable.
Wow. And the author gives a very specific reason for moving out to this liminal space. They write, we haven't done that in a while, but the body needed it, and the body knew, and we listened.
That is such a crucial line.
It is. But what does that actually mean from a physiological standpoint? How does the body know something before the conscious mind does.
So what you're looking at there is somatic intelligence overriding cognitive gridlock.
Somatic meaning the body.
Right. When an individual navigates prolonged periods of stress, scarcity, or trauma, a severe disconnect frequently develops between the mind and the body.
Like they stop talking to each other.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex, which is the logical planning part of the brain, takes over entirely. It acts as this hypervigilant manager trying to calculate survival.
Right, just crunching numbers and scanning for threats.
And consequently, the body's subtle intuitive signals get suppressed because they are deemed irrelevant or, frankly, inconvenient to the immediate mission of staying alive.
So the brain is like, we don't have time to feel a breeze, we have to survive.
Exactly. But the body keeps its own ledger of what it requires to regulate the nervous system. The sudden impulse to sleep on the balcony is the somatic nervous system signaling that it requires a change in temperature, fresh air, and ambient acoustic input to downregulate.
To calm down from that chronic stress state.
Yes, from sympathetic arousal. By actually listening to that impulse, the author bridges that mind-body disconnect.
Okay, let's unpack the timeline of this because I find the causality here really fascinating.
It's a bit of a chicken or egg situation.
Exactly. Did the physical environment of the balcony, the cool air, the specific hum of the traffic, did those external factors actually trigger the internal feeling of safety? Or did an internal feeling of safety, something that had been quietly accumulating over weeks, finally reach a threshold that allowed them to step out onto the balcony in the first place?
It's a great question. The mechanism operates as a reciprocal loop, though the text heavily implies a built-up internal readiness.
Really? Where do they imply that?
Well, the author later notes, turns out Weddy has been here for a while.
Oh, wow. I missed that.
Yeah. This suggests that the internal capacity for safety had already regenerated, but the individual couldn't access it because they were trapped in the habitual environment of their bedroom.
Because the bedroom was tied to the stress.
Exactly. Environments become anchors for our neurochemical states. If you have spent months lying awake in your bed, consumed by anxiety, your brain literally wires the physical space of that bed to the production of cortisol and adrenaline.
So the bed equals panic.
Right. Stepping out onto the balcony didn't magically conjure safety out of thin air. Rather, it provided a neurologically neutral environment, a clean slate that allowed the pre-existing hidden readiness to finally surface.
Without the interference of the bedroom's trauma associations. That is wild. Changing the physical space broke the neurological spell.
It broke the pattern.
And the immediate payoff of breaking that spell is staggering. The author states the dreams are coming back. And they clarify that for months, their mind hasn't been dreaming at all.
Right, it's been doing something else entirely.
Yeah, they say it's been doing whatever the mind does instead of dreaming, processing, churning, staying too close to the surface. So if we look at the architecture of sleep, what exactly is happening when a brain refuses to dream for months?
When an organism is in a state of hypervigilance, its sleep architecture undergoes a radical defensive alteration.
Defense, like it's guarding itself.
Exactly. Normal sleep cycles through light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, and rapid eye movement, or REM sleep. And REM sleep is where vivid narrative dreaming occurs.
Right, the intense dreams.
But REM sleep requires a profound state of biological vulnerability. Your body actually undergoes a temporary muscle paralysis called atonia to prevent you from acting out your dreams.
Oh, right. So you don't actually run when you're running in a drain.
Yes. So, if your subconscious believes you are in a dangerous environment, the amygdala will actively block the brain from descending into REM sleep.
Because being paralyzed in a dangerous place is a bad idea.
Exactly. It forces the brain to stay in lighter stages of sleep so that you can wake up and react to a threat instantly.
So it's essentially keeping the engine idling. Like it refuses to shut the car off completely because it thinks it might need to speed away at any second.
That is a perfect analogy. The processing and churning the author describes is the brain attempting to run threat simulation algorithms.
Just constantly crunching scenarios.
Right. It is organizing worries, calculating risks, and trying to solve waking problems while supposedly at rest. It is a highly metabolic, exhausting state.
No wonder they were so tired.
Deep restorative REM sleep is a biological luxury. It requires a baseline level of verified safety. So the return of narrative dreams means the brain has finally assessed the environment as secure enough to permit total vulnerability.
And the specific categories of dreams that returned are so telling. They explicitly list adventure dreams, building dreams.
Those are expansive, creative concepts.
Yeah, not just survival. But the most significant return was what they call an intimate dream. And they're meticulously specific about what made it intimate.
It wasn't about intensity.
Exactly, they wrote, not intense, just close, holding someone's hand in a way that wasn't scary, and then they add the most crucial detail. There was no shame, no guilt, no flinch.
A flinch. That is so important.
Let's talk about the flinch, because that feels so entirely physical.
The flinch is a deeply ingrained, involuntary sympathetic nervous system response. It is the body bracing for anticipated physical or emotional impact.
Like tensing up before you get hit.
Yes. When a person has experienced repeated boundary violations or relational trauma, intimacy becomes neurologically linked to danger.
So closeness literally equals pain to the brain.
Right. The brain anticipates that closeness will result in pain, so it fires a motor command to contract the muscles and protect the vital organs. That's the flinch.
Wow.
So for the mind to construct a dream scenario where intimate physical contact occurs without that involuntary bracing mechanism, that means that on a profound subconscious level, the threat detection system is finally standing down.
The neurological link between closeness and danger has been suspended.
Exactly.
And this directly precipitates the massive realization the author has upon waking. They wake up from this dream where they didn't flinch, and they realize that all the uncertainty they've been carrying about closeness with other people, all the hesitation, the avoidance, it isn't because they are somehow broken inside.
Such a powerful realization.
Right. It is simply because they genuinely didn't know yet which others were safe. They say, that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing at all.
We are looking at a monumental cognitive reappraisal here. In our society, when an individual struggles with connection, intimacy, or trust, the prevailing narrative, both internally and externally, is heavily pathologizing.
We just label them as broken.
Right. The individual internalizes the struggle as a core character defect. They believe they lack the fundamental machinery required for human connection.
I'm just bad at relationships.
Yes. But what this author does is shift the locus of the problem entirely. They recognize that their avoidance is not an internal, unfixable defect, but rather a highly logical, rational adaptation to an external environment lacking verified, safe actors.
So their attachment system isn't broken at all.
No, it's just appropriately highly selective based on past data.
Okay, so having established this newly awakened sense of safety from the night before, having recognized that their internal machinery is actually functioning perfectly, we follow the author from the balcony into the mundane light of morning.
The transition here is great.
It brings us to the central revelation of the text, the title itself. The author moves from this profound psychological deep sea, diving into the most ordinary task imaginable, making a morning smoothie.
It is the stark contrast between the profound and the mundane that gives this section its analytical weight.
Yeah, we shift from the subconscious to the highly tactile reality of the kitchen counter.
Exactly.
They describe the act of pulling ice cubes from the plastic tray, and the level of detail is almost microscopic. They write that they are following the pattern. We always follow the same corners first, the same count, the same satisfying resistance and release.
Resistance and release.
Yeah. Why is the brain so drawn to that level of sensory specificity? What is it about the resistance and release of an ice cube tray that the mind latches onto?
The brain craves tactile, predictable feedback, especially when transitioning out of a state of internal chaos. What the author is describing is the spontaneous utilization of a sensory grounding technique.
Grounding, like bringing yourself back to earth?
Yes. The brain has a network called the default mode network, or DMN, which is highly active when we are ruminating, worrying, or disconnected from the present moment.
Ah, so when you're just spiraling in your head, the DMN is running the show.
Precisely. Engaging in a highly specific, tactile, mechanical action, feeling the temperature of the ice, anticipating the precise physical tension of the plastic, executing the exact sequence of the corners, it forces the brain to allocate its resources away from the DMN.
And into the physical senses.
Right, into the sensoromotor cortex.
Yeah.
It physically anchors the mind in the present reality of the physical world. The author notes that their mind falls into it entirely. Just the ice cubes, just the rhythm, just the cold and the click in the sequence.
And the immediate internal feedback to that sequence is overwhelmingly positive. They write, and it was good. It felt profoundly good to completely lose themselves in that hyper-focused rhythm.
But then comes the pivot.
Yes. Right there at the kitchen counter, the author pivots and delivers a massive philosophical breakthrough. They realize that this exact same feeling, this intense, rigid hyperfixation on counting and sequencing can be absolutely terrifying in a different context.
This is where the text dissects the dual nature of repetitive behaviors. The author acknowledges that when resources are scarce, when the environment is unstable, this identical feeling of hyperfixation becomes a void.
It's like a black hole.
Exactly. They note that in survival mode, even counting ice cubes starts to feel like the only thing left in existence. It devolves into a frantic, desperate attempt to exert micro-control over a macro environment that is completely out of their hands.
I mean, if you are drowning in a chaotic life, if you don't know how you're going to pay your rent, suddenly the exact sequence you use to pull ice cubes out of a tray becomes this obsessive, terrifying anchor.
It feels pathological.
You start thinking, if I don't pop these corners out in the exact right order, the entire world is going to collapse.
Yes, magical thinking kicks in.
But the brilliance of this author is that they recognize the core mechanism hasn't changed at all.
Correct. The neurobiological mechanism is entirely identical. The basal ganglia is running the exact same pattern recognition software.
The same motor sequence.
The motor sequence is identical, the counting is identical, the brain is simply attempting to map predictability onto its surroundings. The author states explicitly, the difference is just whether the rest of life is there underneath it.
It reminds me of how the exact same stimulus can feel entirely different depending on what's around it, like in music.
Oh, that's a good comparison. Let's unpack that.
Well, if you have a repetitive stimulus, the context changes everything about how your body receives it. Imagine a heavy, driving, highly repetitive bass line, just a relentless thumping sequence of notes.
Okay, I can hear.
Now, if a director places that exact bass line underneath a tense, claustrophobic scene in a psychological thriller, maybe the protagonist is hiding in a dark room, your brain processes that repetition as a threat.
It mimics a racing heartbeat. It induces panic and dread.
Right. The repetition is interpreted as the sound of impending doom. But if you take that exact same bass line, you don't alter the pitch, you don't change the tempo, you keep the precise mathematical sequence of the notes, and you drop it underneath a joyful, euphoric dance track in a well-lit club surrounded by your friends, everything changes.
The context shifts.
Suddenly, that driving rhythm is the groove. It becomes the foundational element that grounds the entire song. It feels euphoric. The notes themselves didn't change at all. The song built around the notes changed.
That perfectly translates the author's core realization. They articulate this by writing, when the pantry has backup, when the groceries are coming, when there's something waiting on the other side of the smoothie, falling into the pattern of pulling ice cubes becomes a melody instead of a void.
A melody instead of a void.
The action has the same shape, only the context changed.
But wait, if the mechanism is exactly the same, why are we as a society so incredibly quick to pathologize it? I mean, if someone tells their friends, I have to tap my coffee cup 3 times every morning or I feel wrong, the immediate cultural response is to diagnose them.
We immediately tell them they have a disorder.
Yeah, that their mind is broken. Why do we do that?
We pathologize it because society generally evaluates behaviors based on their appearance of rigid nonconformity rather than their functional utility to the individual's nervous system.
So because it looks weird, we assume it's bad.
Exactly. We have an inherent bias against highly rigid routines because they appear compulsive. The immediate assumption is that there is a dysfunction, that the brain's software has a glitch.
But this text is arguing the opposite.
Yes. It argues a radically compassionate counter-narrative. The mind isn't broken. It is operating exactly as it evolved to. It is seeking order and predictability.
Which is a healthy drive.
Right. When the external environment provides zero stability, the brain's attempt to manufacture stability through an ice cube tray looks frantic and disordered. But provide a little stability underneath it, and that exact same neurological drive to sequence and count transforms into a grounding, beautiful melody.
It completely reframes how we look at our own weird little habits. Like instead of looking in the mirror and asking, why am I so obsessive about how my desk is arranged?
Yeah.
You can step back and ask a functional question.
Is my pantry empty right now?
Yes. Is my life lacking backup? Because if you are spiraling over the alignment of your pens, maybe the problem isn't the pen alignment. Maybe the problem is the scarcity surrounding it.
Recognizing that structural stability transforms a psychological void into a melody is a profound philosophical insight. However, philosophy alone does not sustain human biology.
Right, you still have to actually live your life.
The subsequent challenge is the practical execution of that stability. How do you actively construct the context that allows the melody to play?
And the author answers this immediately by transitioning from internal realizations to the external redesign of their physical space.
They move straight from the philosophy of the ice cubes into the architecture of the bathroom counter.
Yeah, they tell us they are building routine into the environment now. And they lay out the specific geography of this setup. They've placed their medications directly next to the smoothie station.
A very deliberate choice.
And they've put a specialized ointment for their feet next to a saline soak for their nose piercing. And crucially, the toothbrush is placed right next to both of those.
The author details the underlying logic of this spatial arrangement with incredible clarity. They say because if you see one, you see all of them, and then somehow you do all of them.
And the practical outcome of this environmental redesign, they state that they went from brushing their teeth once a week to easily doing it twice a day.
That is a massive behavioral shift.
It is. But here is the most important sentence in this entire section. I want to look at it closely. They write that they achieved this shift, not because we decided to try harder because we put everything in one place. That's it. That's the whole trick.
We are looking at a masterclass in reducing cognitive load and a total rejection of the willpower myth.
But wait, I want to push back on this aggressively because this flies in the face of everything we are taught about discipline.
Oh, I know it does.
Isn't this kind of habit stacking just a fancy, validated way of enabling laziness?
Yeah.
I mean, if we don't force ourselves to build internal discipline, if we just make everything overly easy, won't this fragile external system just collapse the second we face real adversity?
It's a common concern.
Why do we culturally glorify the struggle of trying harder?
Yeah.
And is there actually a biological reason why trying harder fails for someone in this author's position?
Well, we glorify the struggle because our cultural narratives are deeply intertwined with concepts of meritocracy and moral fortitude.
Like the whole no pain, no gain mentality.
Precisely. We falsely equate the expenditure of agonizing effort with the inherent worthiness of the outcome. If you did not suffer to achieve the task, the flawed logic suggests, then the achievement is invalid.
Which is pretty messed up when you think about it.
It is. Because the biological reality of the human brain completely dismantles this moral framework.
How so? What is the brain actually doing when we try to muscle through a habit?
Willpower, or active self-regulation, is an exhaustible biological resource. It relies heavily on the prefrontal cortex, which consumes an immense amount of metabolic energy, specifically glucose.
So thinking hard literally burns fuel.
Yes, and when an individual is recovering from prolonged scarcity, trauma, or chronic stress, and remember, this author was recently struggling to brush their teeth more than once a week, their baseline cognitive load is already maxed out just managing basic survival algorithms.
Their tank is already empty.
Right. Every single individual decision requires a surge of executive function. If the toothbrush is in the bathroom, the medications are in the kitchen cabinet, and the foot ointment is in the bedroom drawer, executing that self-care routine requires a series of distinct, high-friction decisions.
Do I have the energy to walk to the bathroom? Should I open the cabinet now?
Exactly.
It's like having a phone battery that's perpetually at 2%, and every time you open a new app to do a different task, the phone threatens to shut down entirely.
That is exactly what it's like. By clustering all these items into one single visual field, the author is fundamentally altering the required neural pathways. In behavioral psychology, this involves habit chaining and manipulating environmental friction.
By placing the items together, you just bypass all those separate decisions.
You bypass the prefrontal cortex almost entirely. You remove the friction of decision-making. The visual cue of the smoothie station triggers an automatic, cascading motor sequence.
If you see one, you see all of them.
Yes, they are outsourcing their executive functioning to their physical environment. It is not enabling laziness. It is an incredibly sophisticated, highly efficient adaptation to finite metabolic resources.
So, relying on internal discipline when your prefrontal cortex is exhausted isn't morally superior. It's just biologically inefficient.
Very inefficient.
If your goal is to brush your teeth and putting the toothbrush in the kitchen achieves that goal, then the kitchen is the correct place for the toothbrush. The author is basically saying, stop trying to run complex software on a drained battery. Just plug the machine into the wall.
Exactly. And this concept of utilizing external structures transitions seamlessly into the author's next reflection, where they compare this newly built, fragile microenvironment in their apartment to a past experience of massive, institutionalized scaffolding.
Right. The author takes us completely out of the apartment for a moment and reflects on a time when they worked in the oil sands. For those who aren't familiar, an oil sands camp is a highly isolated, highly structured industrial environment.
It's intense.
It is. The author paints the picture. The food was there, the gym was there, the bus came at a certain time.
And then they offer an analysis of their time there that challenges conventional perspectives on institutionalization. They write, "We ran like a cog in a machine and took care of ourselves without ever having to understand how."
A cog in a machine. I mean, 99 times out of 100, when someone uses that phrase, they are describing a dystopian nightmare.
Usually.
It's usually a complaint about the soul-crushing drudgery of corporate life or industrial labor. But here, the author is describing it almost wistfully. They are expressing a profound appreciation for the psychological relief it provided.
They say they just moved through the structure that existed.
Right. But I have to ask about the implications for autonomy here. We have this massive societal narrative that rugged independence, making all your own choices, being the master of your own destiny, is the absolute peak of human health and self-actualization.
The self-made myth.
Yes. Yet this author found actual psychological healing in surrendering all choices. How does surrendering autonomy equate to self-care?
Well, it forces us to recognize that autonomy is a privilege that requires an immense reservoir of cognitive capital.
Cognitive capital, I love that term.
When an individual is operating from a severe psychological deficit, the demand for continuous autonomous decision-making is paralyzing. We refer to this as decision fatigue.
Having to choose what's for dinner is suddenly overwhelming.
Exactly. In a highly structured environment like the oil sands camp, the massive burden of managing the logistics of daily life, calculating grocery budgets, planning meals, scheduling transportation, deciding when and how to exercise is entirely eliminated. The institution absorbs the cognitive load.
So the company is essentially acting as the prefrontal cortex for the individual.
Precisely. For someone whose internal resources are completely depleted, surrendering to that external structure is an immense stabilizing relief. You do not have to plan your survival, you merely have to participate in the pre-existing flow of the institution.
The structure carries the weight.
The structure carries the weight of the organism. However, the author is highly self-aware of their current reality. They are no longer operating within the industrial scaffolding of the oil sands. They are back in their apartment, a space they affectionately refer to as the den.
Right, the den. They say, we're building that structure now, slowly, here in the den, object by object, spot by spot. It highlights such a stark contrast.
It's a huge shift in scale.
In the oil sands, the structure was a massive, prefabricated steel grid they just walked into. In the den, they're trying to weave a safety net out of a toothbrush and a bottle of piercing soak.
And they acutely recognize the vulnerability of this self-built web. They describe their current structure as fragile, and the rationale they provide for this fragility unveils a deeply embedded trauma response.
This part broke my heart a little bit.
They state, "It lives in the apartment, and we've never had stability last more than 2 years, and we know that."
We've never had stability last more than 2 years. That sentence hits like a freight train.
It reveals so much about their baseline state.
Let's talk about the psychological weight of temporal tracking in trauma survivors. What does it actually do to a brain to live with an internal subconscious ticking clock?
It fundamentally rewires how you experience time.
Imagine doing all this work, finally sleeping on the balcony, finding the melody in the ice cubes, clustering your habits, but the entire time, your brain is quietly running a stopwatch counting down from 24 months, just waiting for the disaster you assume is inevitable.
The brain is fundamentally a predictive machine. When an individual experiences cyclical instability, perhaps through recurring evictions, job losses, or relational collapses that happen to follow a rough chronological pattern, the brain hardwires that timeline into its threat detection algorithms.
That learns the pattern.
Exactly. It creates a neuroplastic pathway that dictates that safety inherently has an expiration date.
So even when things are good, they're not really safe.
Living with that internal 2-year clock means that even in moments of profound peace, the nervous system is siphoning off a percentage of its energy to prepare for the inevitable collapse.
Just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right. It is the acute awareness that their physical environment, the very apartment they are relying on to act as their external prefrontal cortex, is fundamentally temporary. If your entire system for remembering to take your medication relies on the layout of a specific kitchen counter, what happens when you are forced to vacate the premises?
The entire architecture of your survival crumbles.
Yes.
But rather than succumbing to the despair of that ticking clock, the author executes an incredibly modern, innovative pivot. They don't just accept the fragility, they engineer a workaround.
A very clever workaround.
They write, The more of it we can get into something digital, something that travels, the more it becomes ours for real. Not just ours here, ours wherever we end up.
This is a remarkable demonstration of adaptive resilience. If the physical environment is the required mechanism for maintaining behavioral stability, but the physical environment is inherently unstable, the logical solution is to manufacture a portable environment.
A portable environment, like putting it on your phone.
By digitizing their routine, perhaps translating the sequence into specific calendar applications, digital reminder ecosystems, or habit tracking software, they are actively severing their reliance on geographic permanence.
They realize their physical house is built on a fault line, so instead of trying to reinforce the foundation, they decide to build an indestructible, fully equipped digital RV.
That's a great way to put it.
They are taking the architecture of their survival and putting it on the cloud, ours wherever we end up. It strips the terror away from the 2-year expiration date because the safety net no longer relies on the lease agreement.
They are constructing a sanctuary made of data. It is the ultimate survival strategy for a transient existence, ensuring that the mechanisms of your safety are entirely portable. And that profound sense of taking active control over their own structure brings us directly to the chronological conclusion of the text. The author grounds us back in the immediate, tangible reality of the kitchen on this specific morning.
Yeah, we've gone on this massive intellectual journey. We've analyzed the biology of sleep on the balcony, the neuroscience of the ice cube repetition, the behavioral psychology of the bathroom counter, and the trauma mechanics of the oil sands and the digital cloud.
It's a lot of ground covered.
But the author snaps us right back to the bedrock reality of the morning. They share a very practical detail. We talked to our mother today. She said not to worry about paying her back for the groceries. We're going to be okay this month.
We cannot overstate the foundational importance of this single sentence. It is the material anchor for the entire piece.
Really, just that one detail about groceries.
Yes. All the profound philosophical realizations about the melody of the ice cubes, all the sophisticated architectural redesign of the habit stations, it is all predicated entirely on this concrete material safety net.
It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs in real time.
Exactly. The mother forgiving the grocery debt is the exact backup in the pantry the author theorized about earlier. The ice cubes would not be a melody if the author was currently experiencing acute panic over how to pay back the grocery money.
The ice cubes would just be the terrifying void again.
Precisely. The debt forgiveness provides the baseline material reality that allows the psychological healing to actually manifest.
And how does the author physically experience the aftermath of this confirmed safety? They describe a physiological state that they refer to as being smoothie drunk.
Smoothie drunk. I love that phrasing.
It's so evocative.
Yeah.
They write, that morning thing where the adrenaline hasn't kicked in yet, and the words are a little sloppy, and the phone slipped out of our hand, and for a second, the idea of a belly flop onto the floor seemed genuinely interesting.
We've all felt a version of that, right?
And I think anyone who has survived a massive stressor recognizes that heavy, slow feeling. But what is actually happening in the body during that smoothie drum phase?
You are looking at the physiological crash that accompanies a massive withdrawal of stress hormones.
The adrenaline leaving the building.
Yes. For months, this individual has been flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, constantly processing and churning. Adrenaline is a powerful stimulant. It causes vasoconstriction, increases heart rate, and makes the muscles highly rigid and hyper-responsive.
It keeps you sharp.
It keeps you sharp, and it certainly keeps you from dropping your phone. When the mother confirms that the groceries are paid for, and the brain finally verifies that the immediate threat of starvation or financial ruin has passed, the sympathetic nervous system powers down its emergency protocols.
So the system just flushes out the stimulants.
Yes, and the parasympathetic nervous system engages, causing sudden vasodilation and a rapid relaxation of the skeletal muscles.
So literally your muscles just go slack.
Exactly. This sudden drop in blood pressure and loss of muscle tension feels intensely disorienting. The words are sloppy because the motor cortex is no longer operating on emergency overdrive. The urge to belly flop onto the floor is the body's overwhelming demand for horizontal rest now that it doesn't need to be primed for running or fighting.
They are literally drunk on the sudden, shocking absence of neurochemical panic.
They're intoxicated by safety.
And as they stand there in the kitchen, experiencing this heavy, sloppy relief, the author gives us one final, revealing look at how their internal system is organized. They write, the engineer is awake, everyone else is still sleeping.
It's such a specific, unusual framing.
It is. What does this tell us about the internal mechanics of their mind?
It reveals a highly sophisticated, compartmentalized internal structure. The persistent use of the plural we throughout the text finds its ultimate explanation here.
Ah, the we. We finally see who we is.
Right. The author actively separates out a specific executive part of the self, naming it the engineer, while acknowledging that everyone else comprises the rest of their internal system.
It paints a picture of a ship navigating through rough waters. The engineer is the pragmatic, logical crew member who takes the early morning watch.
Exactly.
The engineer is this specific neural network capable of sequencing the ice cubes. The engineer is the part of the brain that knows to cluster the medications next to the toothbrush to bypass decision fatigue. The engineer is the one analyzing how to digitize the routine to survive the 2-year trauma clock. The engineer handles the logistics of survival.
And because the engineer is highly competent and actively managing the external systems, and crucially, because the mother has secured the perimeter by forgiving the grocery debt, everyone else is granted permission to rest.
So he can finally sleep.
The traumatized parts of the self, the exhausted emotional centers, the fearful fragments, they do not have to be hypervigilant. They can remain in the deep restorative sleep that the balcony initially facilitated. The engineer is absorbing the operational load so that the rest of the organism can heal.
It is an image of profound internal cooperation. The engineer standing quiet watch in the kitchen, making the smoothie, listening to the melody of the ice cubes, allowing the rest of the mind to finally rest. And the text concludes on a note of stark, unvarnished reality. It's the last day of February. We made it through.
We made it through. It is a testament to the fact that healing is often entirely unglamorous.
Right, it's not always fireworks.
It does not claim that the trauma is erased. It doesn't pretend that the 2-year expiration clock has magically stopped ticking. It simply acknowledges the monumental victory of surviving a difficult cycle of time and arriving at the end of the month with a deeper functional understanding of their own psychological machinery.
It completely recontextualizes the way we view our own survival. Look at the immense territory we've covered today just by analyzing one morning routine.
It's incredible how much is packed into a smoothie and some ice cubes.
Truly. We started by examining the somatic intelligence of a body seeking the liminal space of a balcony just to feel safe enough to achieve REM sleep and dream without flinching.
We explored the deep neuroscience of hyperfixation.
Right, realizing that the rigid repetition of counting ice cubes isn't a glitch in our software. It's a fundamental mechanism that shifts from a terrifying void to a grounding melody based entirely on the presence of environmental stability.
We dismantled the cultural myth of willpower, proving that the biological reality of cognitive load makes environmental design like clustering a toothbrush with daily medications infinitely more sustainable than relying on internal discipline.
We analyzed the complex relief of outsourcing executive function to institutional structures, like the oil sands, and we looked at the innovative resilience required to digitize physical safety routines to outmaneuver the internal clocks of trauma.
And finally, we examine the profound physiological crash of the parasympathetic nervous system taking over.
That smoothie drunk feeling, allowing the internal engineer to quietly manage the logistics while the exhausted self rests. It is a masterclass in functional self-awareness, and it offers a highly practical roadmap for anyone listening.
It really does.
If you are struggling with a habit, if you are constantly failing to execute a routine, stop attributing it to a moral failing. Stop telling yourself you lack discipline. Analyze your environment. Where's the friction? How can you consolidate your tasks to bypass your exhausted prefrontal cortex? Be the engineer for your own mind. Build the structure that allows you to survive.
The ultimate takeaway from this text is the application of radical structural grace. Grace for the mechanisms our brains use to cope, grace for our fundamental biological need for external scaffolding, and grace for the profound reality that sometimes simply engineering a system that allows you to make it through the month is the highest possible form of success.
Absolutely. And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to explore on your own. We spent a lot of time discussing how the author realized that counting the exact corners of an ice cube tray could be an overwhelming void of panic in times of scarcity, or a deeply satisfying melody in times of stability. The action itself never changed. Only the baseline of safety did.
Context is everything.
It is. So I want you to look inward at a behavior of your own. Think about that rigid routine, that specific compulsion, or that highly repetitive action that you constantly judge yourself for. the one you hide from other people because it makes you worry that you're fundamentally flawed. If you could alter your reality tomorrow and completely remove the pressure of scarcity from your environment, if the pantry was full, the structural threats were neutralized, and your nervous system felt entirely, verifiably safe, would that behavior still feel like a symptom of a broken mind? Or would you suddenly realize that it was never a flaw at all, but rather just your brain playing a beautiful, complex melody that you simply hadn't learned how to listen to yet?